Hi, I'm Bruce Knock. Thanks for tuning in. It's pretty amazing how much zoos have changed over my lifetime. When I was a kid, zoo enclosures were mostly concrete and bars. Since then, habitats have been enriched and naturalized. The mission has shifted too from entertainment and public display to wildlife conservation and public education. Animal care has also improved. Modern behavioral modification methods and advanced therapeutics are now used to keep the animals physically and mentally fit. And recently, zoos have turned their attention to hoof care, greatly intensifying their efforts to make it better. I'd like to be part of that, help if I can. I've liked zoos all my life. It's one of the things that drew me to studies of animal behavior. I have a master's degree from Bucknell University and a PhD from Rutgers University in the neuroendocrinology of animal behavior. Followed that with postdoctoral studies of steroid and receptor autoradiography. Long story short, it launched a 53-year research career in biomedical science. But I never lost my love or interest in animals. Then back in 2004, shortly after I published the book about training horses, I was asked to give the keynote presentation at a hoof care conference. They more or less wanted me to talk about training horses for trimming, I think. Honestly, I was a bit bewildered by the invitation, but I went with it and gave it my best shot. I can't say if I did a good job or not that day, but I did make some great friends. And what they said about hoof care made complete sense to me. It fit with what I knew from my years of biomedical research about the body and how behavior and the physical and social environment can affect it. So I saw an opportunity for me to add more depth to their mission. So I joined them in what became a worldwide journey to advance barefoot hoof care, natural hoof care. Now, here I am. I'm 79 years old, hoping to use my diverse background and experience to shine a light on a few hoof care related topics I think are important for zoos to hear about. So I'm going to share some of my observations, thoughts, and personal opinions. I hope it stimulates some thought and healthy discussion, and maybe helps zoos find the right path to healthy hooves. I think this presentation is suitable for anyone interested in hoof care, but I'd really like zoo administrators, decision makers, and zoo oversight organizations to hear it. So pass it along to them if you can. They're the people, it seems to me, who hold the power to guide hoof care in the right direction and provide the resources for the multifaceted approach that I'm going to talk about. So let's get started. First, I'm going to tell you what hoof care is. Well, what it is to me. Then I'll tell you why it's important to the animals and why it makes financial sense for zoos to invest in it. And lastly, I'm going to tell you about some of the less obvious attributes I think hoof care providers should have. So let's start here with what I mean by hoof care. I want to make sure that we're on the same page right from the start. When hoof care is mentioned, the first thing most people think of is trimming. Knowing how to correctly trim a hoof and having the skills to do it competently are really important. But what's the purpose? What are we trying to achieve by trimming? Well, for me, the goal is pretty straightforward. It's to encourage the hoof to grow toward the form that develops naturally under Aboriginal lifestyle and environmental conditions. Pretty simple. You see, hooves evolved primarily as an adaptation to open, hard, and abrasive terrains like grasslands, steppes, savannas, and deserts. It's only under such conditions that hooves grow and wear into a form where all of the parts work cooperatively to optimize the animal's ability to travel, often over long distances, for food and water, and to escape danger when necessary. It's the form nature designed and refined over millions of years.
Completing journeys like this is routine for a desert brumby like the black mare. She can do it because her ever-growing hooves are tough and hard. The walls of the hooves are straight and without flares. The heels are short and the frog is thick and hard. The toe is beveled in front. The entire perimeter of the hoof wall is beveled. The hoof appears to have been sculptured by its interaction with the environment. These are the horse trails that the brumbies are using as they move from Farris Springs all the way to their feeding grounds, 14 odd kilometres away. You can see their footprints here and their manure. But what's really interesting is this rock that's sticking out. You can see these sharp edges here that never get touched by the horse's hooves, but this side is rounded and smooth, and there's a mark here where a hoof will have struck. This means two things. Not only has the rock been rounded and smooth, but the horse's hooves have too. So the hooves are striking these rocks, coming this way, that way, at every angle, and getting a trim. A trim with virtually every footstep, because this is hard as well. And this is the gift that evolution has given the horse, a hoof, an ever-growing hoof that can accommodate this wear and tear and yet stay hard and tough and allow horses to make these incredible journeys every day of their lives. This structure, the horse's foot, has been the key to the survival of the black mare and her offspring.
So, in essence, the trim just mimics what Aboriginal conditions do. It substitutes for the wear a hoof would be getting under those conditions, conditions that provide sufficient wear to offset growth and maintain a strong, balanced, compact form with internal and external structures properly aligned. Now that sounds easy, right? And conceptually, it's pretty simple. But it isn't as easy to do as you might think. To do it competently, you have to be proficient with trimming tools and have a clear understanding of what you're trying to achieve when you use them. And it's as important to know what not to do as it is to know what to do. But let me be perfectly clear. I'm not talking about carving a hoof into some preconceived shape, a shape based on, well, irrational conjecture or weak assumptions and the rigid measurements derived from them. To the uneducated, such methods are often mistakenly believed to be advanced, even empirically based methods. But in fact, the resulting hoof shape doesn't match up with what nature intended. Instead, certain rational principles that were derived after extensive empirical studies of wild, free-roaming horses living under Aboriginal conditions and the collective experience of leading hoof care professionals around the world should be applied. We call it the natural trim. As I said, essentially, it amounts to using trimming to simulate the wear that occurs under Aboriginal conditions. Now, here's the important part for zoos. Early on, more than 10 years ago now, when we started to consider launching a hoof care program for zoo hoof stock, we thought that to do it right would require knowledge of each species' hoof form under Aboriginal conditions. That we had to start by figuring out what form the hooves assume under Aboriginal lifestyle, terrain, and environmental conditions, the conditions under which the hooves were designed to function optimally. That turns out not to be the case. That information is useful, but it's not crucial. We learned through experience that the guiding principles that emerge for horses also work for other ungulate species. Now, we should have recognized that from the start because our certified people around the world have been successfully applying those principles to goats, cows, and other hoofed animals for decades. But it just took us a little time to put it all together. And now, the method has been successfully adopted by people from various zoos, like the St. Louis Zoo, Cheyenne Mountain Zoo, and Naples Zoo, among others. In any event, I'm committed to the natural trim for both horses and other ungulates. It's a functionally and anatomically correct trim that's been applied successfully to, well, I'm guessing hundreds of thousands of ungulates worldwide. That can't be said for any other barefoot trimming method. But there is one caveat. It's not a magic bullet. A natural trim will produce strong, healthy hooves. There is no question about that. Assuming, and this is extremely important, assuming management practices in the animal's environment and welfare are reasonable. If they aren't, nothing, let me repeat that, nothing that is done to the hoof itself is going to prevent the development of hoof problems or fix them. And that's why it's vitally important to understand that optimal hoof care requires a multifaceted approach, one that recognizes the importance of regular, competent trimming, but also the importance of non-trimming factors that affect hoof health. Cindy Hall's an avid follower of that strategy. I think she lives and breathes it. These are some of the before and after pictures she took of animals at Naples Zoo. I'll give you a minute to look them over. Obviously, there was much more to these healing transitions than just trimming. You can hear what Cindy had to say about the trimming and non-trimming factors that contributed to these remarkable changes on YouTube if you're interested. And if you contact her, I'm sure she would be happy to tell you about other successes she's had. Here's the link to that presentation and Cindy's contact information. Non-trimming factors. I collectively call them life factors. By that, I mean all of the things that directly impact the hoof itself or the animal's physical and mental well-being. Hoof health and shape are significantly influenced by such factors. They are at least as important to hoof health as the trim. Well, actually, they're more important than the trim. In fact, deficiencies in life factors can undermine the efforts of even the most highly skilled trimmer. For example, Jamie Jackson, one of the pioneers of barefoot hoof care and one of the best trimmers in the world, complained to me many times about how life factors, undermine his trimming. And here's the important part. It's a fundamental principle that I see disregarded over and over again. And animals pay the price, eventually with their lives. Problems caused by life factors can't be prevented or fixed by trimming. They can't be fixed by putting shoes or other devices on a hoof either. Such devices and also extreme invasive procedures can and often do make hoof problems worse. Frankly, I cringe at some of the things I see done to hoofs by veterinarians and farriers that are applauded as advanced treatment protocols.
My God, what is this, the Dark Ages?
Instead, the root cause of the problem, the life factor problem, has to be corrected. Hopefully not as a reaction to a debilitating pathology, but as part of a proactive program that recognizes signs of a potential problem and fixes it before it becomes debilitating. Then, after the life factor has been optimized, a proper trim can facilitate healing. Over more than 20 years of interacting with leading barefoot hoof care professionals from around the world, I haven't heard of one case where something more was required. Not one. Not shoes, not hoof resection, not amputation, and so on. Nothing of that sort. But I have heard of a great many animals that have been saved from euthanasia by this simple approach. Optimize life factors and properly trim the hoof. It's the keystone of modern barefoot hoof care, the defining strategy. I'll end this part of the presentation with a scenario I've seen play out over and over again. Everything is going along just fine. The animal's hooves are awesome. Then they're not. What does the hoof care provider do? Well, too often, he or she starts mucking around with the trim, changing it to try and fix the problem, carving the hooves up in this way or that, or even putting shoes on the animal. All the while, totally ignoring the possibility that the hoof problem might have been caused by a change in the animal's mental or physical health or social environment. And the animal's health and feet continue to deteriorate until, well, it dies or is euthanized, or best case scenario, someone smarter comes along and saves the animal. Be the smart one. Understand that regular competent trimming is important, but life factors can still cause problems, even when the trimming is terrific. That realization sparked the modern day barefoot movement and saved many horses from euthanasia. It can do the same for zoo ungulates. But let's talk more specifically about why hoof care is important. 21st century hoof care, not some archaic method from the Middle Ages. Let's start here. And I'll give you a minute to look over this list. The one thing all of these hoof problems have in common is that they all cause pain or at least discomfort. That in turn activates stress response. Any physical or psychological stimuli that disrupt homeostasis results in a stress response. That includes foot pain and discomfort. Now, I'm sure all of you know that stress, especially severe or chronic stress, isn't good for you or your animals. It's old news at this point, but maybe you don't realize just how devastating chronic stress can be, how hoof discomfort, day after day, affects an animal's mental and physical well-being. You see, experts, like my longtime friend, the late Bruce McEwen, agree that as much as 90% of our health problems are stress-related. It's just as bad for animals. Stress has a widespread, sometimes devastating, negative effect on bodily processes. For example, I'm sure you already know that stress can increase susceptibility to diseases, but it's not quite as straightforward as you might think. And what actually happens only makes sense when you recognize that the stress response is identical to the fight or flight reaction, the physiological changes that prepare the body to fight or flee. So when the stress response, the fight or flight reaction, is initially activated, many aspects of the innate immune system are actually enhanced. It's one of the things the body does to prepare for a battle. It went unnoticed for a long time because the number of immune cells in the bloodstream actually drops, suggesting a decrease in immunity. That's not it. When the stress response is activated, immune cells, specifically leukocytes, which are also called white blood cells, are dispatched to places that are prone to infection and wounding, especially the skin and lymph nodes. When they get to those places, they leave the bloodstream and attach to nearby tissues and organs and wait for a call to action. It's called immune cell trafficking. It's the process by which white blood cells migrate from the bloodstream into tissues and lymphatic organs. It allows the immune system to continuously monitor the body for pathogens, respond to infections, and resolve inflammation. Stressors of all types, physical and psychological, boost immunity for 30 minutes or so. But when a stressor persists for longer periods of time, for example, due to chronic hoof discomfort, immunity plummets. Bad news. The number of infection-fighting white blood cells decreases, and a persistent, low-grade inflammation develops. The animal's ability to resist and recover from viruses and other infectious diseases is compromised. And here's the insidious twist to that. Among other things, the animal becomes more susceptible to bacterial infections of the hoof, like thrush, abscesses, white line disease, exacerbating the root cause of it all, the hoof discomfort. That in turn aggravates the impact of stress on general health. Chronically stressed animals become more susceptible to metabolic problems, skin conditions, gastrointestinal issues, autoimmune diseases, Cushing's disease, depression, and probably anything else you can think of. It can become a vicious cycle with both the hooves and general health progressively deteriorating. And if you wait until a hoof problem is evident to take action, well, you've waited too long. This loop is already in fast forward mode. By the time a hoof problem becomes evident, at least to most untrained people, it has already and continues to have a negative impact on the animal's overall well-being. If that's not enough to convince you to take hoof care seriously, the chronic pain and discomfort caused by hoof problems can also accelerate aging and all the problems that go along with it. Here's the thing. Our cells and those of animals are constantly wearing out and getting damaged. To maintain the health of tissues, damaged and dying cells have to be replaced as fast as they're lost. That's the job of cell division or cell replication. It produces new, identical cells that can replace the old, worn out, or damaged ones. The problem is, cells can't divide forever. Only cancer cells can do that. They're essentially immortal, thanks to an enzyme called telomerase. But normal cells can only divide 40 to 60 times. It's called the Hayflick limit. That limit is set by the length of telomeres. A telomere, the green stuff in the image, is a region at the tip of a chromosome. It protects the chromosome from damage during cell replication. Telomeres play a critical role in determining the number of times a cell can divide, and therefore how long a cell line remains viable, how long it can produce new replacement cells to help maintain and heal the tissue it's part of. Each time a cell divides, a portion of the telomere is lost. After 40 to 60 divisions, so much has been lost that the aged cell stops dividing. Technically, it has reached the Hayflick limit and gets stuck in the first stage of cell division, the G1 phase, the phase when it prepares for replication. But it can't follow through and produce a new replacement cell. So here's the thing.
The once unimaginable genetic structures called telomeres, which protect the ends of our chromosomes from fraying. As we age, our telomeres shorten.
What's interesting is stress, by way of stress hormones, can accelerate the shortening of telomeres.
So, as an ever larger percentage of the body's cells reach the Hayflick limit and are unable to replicate, maintenance and repair of the body become compromised. Here's how Dr. Calvin Harley explains it.
It turns out that our cells have a built-in clocking mechanism, a cell division clock that ultimately leads to a suicide switch. And we can see that clock at the ends of our chromosomes, the protective tip. So I have a low-tech model here of what's going on, and it may be the exception to the rule about complexity, because this was the subject of the Nobel Prize in 2009 about how telomeres play such a critical role in aging and age-related diseases. So let's pretend that this is one of my chromosomes. It has a centromere at the middle, which is important for segregating replicated chromosomes between cells, and telomeres at each end. If this was to scale according to the size of that telomere, this chromosome would be about 100 miles long. So these are actually very small components, but critically important. So we know that every time a cell divides, due to a process called the end replication problems, telomeres get a little bit shorter. So here we are, I'm losing some of my cell division capacity. And Alyssa Epple will later tell you that stress causes telomeres to shrink or accelerated telomere loss. So this is for the stress of giving a TED-Med talk. and in addition, we know that lifestyle changes, that lifestyle impacts telomere biology as well. So I missed my morning run. Here goes a few more. And this is for the hot dog I had on the weekend. So of course the same thing is happening at the other end of the chromosomes. So now I have a chromosome with critically short telomeres at both ends. And what this does, why it matters, is that this type of a chromosome is inherently genetically unstable. It's going to recombine. There will be further breakages within the chromosome. And this leads to loss of the ability of the cells to divide. And ultimately, tissues start to fail, tissues and organs, and we end up getting disease and die. So
Telomere length and life expectancy are positively correlated. Longer telomeres, longer life. Shorter telomeres, shorter life. Telomere shortening is likely to account for most of the decline in efficiency and increase in vulnerability that go along with aging. And stress, like from the pain and discomfort of a hoof problem, can accelerate the whole deal. You might be thinking that I'm probably making a mountain out of a molehill. But in one early study done by Dr. Eppel, who Dr. Harley just referred to, telomere length in women who were chronically stressed shortened 6 times faster than normal. And if that's not bad enough, paternal telomere length appears to be inheritable. So the shortening caused by stress apparently can be transmitted through generations. And that brings us to epigenetics and transgenerational inheritance. But that's a story I'll tell another time. I do talk about it extensively in our workshop because it involves processes and outcomes that could seriously compromise a zoo's species survival plan and saving animals from extinction initiatives. In any event, before I close, I want to talk briefly about some of the attributes beyond the obvious I think a hoof care provider should have. Things I personally wouldn't compromise on. Qualities my hoof care provider must have. I believe a well-trained hoof care provider is a healthcare specialist. They're not just trimmers. They should also be able to provide insights, not just about the condition of an animal's feet, but to its overall well-being. Hooves record the history of an animal's mental and physical health. They're windows into the effectiveness of management practices and the animal's well-being, assuming we're sufficiently knowledgeable to look through that window. As a healthcare specialist, he or she should also abide by the same fundamental principle every other healthcare provider should follow. First, do no harm. Remember, I said earlier that when trimming, knowing what not to do is as important as knowing what to do. That principle applies to every aspect of an animal's life. It's a baseline standard for integrity, caution, and responsibility that ensures that the burden of any action never outweighs its benefit. And if you're not sure, well, don't do it. Turn it over to someone with appropriate qualifications. Now I'll let you read. Cindy makes an important point. Hoof care providers need to be mindful of how they affect an animal. Their goal should always be to keep the animal as calm and comfortable as possible. Expediency is important when trimming. Get the job done. But building trust and keeping it is paramount. It trumps everything. Now, this, of course, has a lot to do with a person's inherent empathy, their ability to recognize, understand, and share the feelings and perspective of an animal. But a good training course should build on that foundation by teaching things like how to approach an animal, how to ask and how not to ask it to do things, how to recognize signs of anxiety or growing impatience, and so on. Again, I'll let you read. I already talked a lot about this. A person's training history is important here. They should have been trained by instructors who were trained and are experienced in barefoot hoof care, natural hoof care. As I said earlier, it's the only hoof form where all of the parts of the foot are working cooperatively and optimally, and in concert with other cursorial adaptations, as nature designed. The goal of farriery training is different. Farriers are trained primarily in forging and the application of shoes. They may also be trained in a variety of other related areas, but they generally are not trained in the theory or practice of natural barefoot trimming. The natural trim isn't it's just not optimal for shoeing. Unlike a natural trim, a farrier trim levels the hoof capsule to create a flat, supportive surface so a shoe rests evenly against the weight-bearing wall. This results in a shape that's significantly different from nature's optimal design. What might work okay when applying shoes doesn't work okay for barefoot animals. But if you generally like a genuinely knowledgeable account of the differences between farriery and natural hoof care, please read this landmark publication by John Graves. John has extensive first-hand experience in both fields. I believe the information in it is crucial to the future of hoof care in zoos. I'll give you a minute. I think this is important because until a hoof care provider has a ton of experience, they're going to run into problems they need help with. I guarantee it. And by a ton of experience, just to give you a perspective, some of our certified people have trimmed tens of thousands of hooves and have helped an uncountable number of animals recover from all sorts of hoof problems. As far as I know, every one of them is willing to consult free of charge, if it doesn't require travel and actual trimming, with anyone who has gone through one of our programs. That's what I mean by a support network. Again, I'll give you a minute to read. My hoof care provider must know that successfully fixing a hoof problem requires identifying the root cause, or as Hippocrates put it, the antecedent of the problem. A hoof problem, as I emphasized earlier, cannot be fixed by trimming unless it was caused by suboptimal trimming practices. Otherwise, you have to search beyond the hoof for the offending life factor. I'll let you read. This is pretty self-explanatory, but it's integral to an overall preventative hoof care program. There has to be communication. Remember, quality hoof care requires a multifaceted approach, and one person can't do it. It has to be a team effort, one that includes veterinarians who have an expertise in general health and an appreciation that there's a reciprocal relationship between hoof health and general health. Zoo administrators who understand the scope and importance of hoof care and can initiate changes to an animal's environment when needed also have to be on board. So I hope I've convinced you that hoof health should be taken seriously. Hoof pathologies and suboptimal trimming practices should not be thought of as just problems for the hard material at the bottom of a leg. Hoof problems can impact every aspect of an animal's well-being. And in addition to making the animal miserable, they can increase the risk of all sorts of disorders and even shorten its life expectancy and the welfare of future generations. Good hoof care can reduce veterinarian-related costs and the costs associated with replacing an animal that could have lived longer with proper hoof care. It's worth the investment. And with that, I wish you a good day.